Wissenschaft fürs Wohnzimmer.
Hello, and a wonderful good evening for all of you out there joining us for today's episode of Wissenschaft fürs Wohnzimmer. Today, with Hanna Dijkstra from the Vrije University of Amsterdam. Hannah will be talking about not microplastic, plastics and the ocean, but she'll let you know what exactly she'll be talking about. This show is presented, as always, by the RVs for Future, which is a grassroots movement from researchers and every other employees around RV that think we do need more science communication all around climate change and environmental topics. My name is Björn Zuko. I'm working in the aquaculture research department and trying to make the food from the ocean as sustainable as possible. So I wish you all the best. And now my beautiful colleagues will present themselves.
Hello, I'm Nils. I'm a PhD candidate working on heat transfer between ocean and atmosphere in the Arctic. And I just want to say that if you like what we do and our show here, feel free to give us a like or subscribe to our channel.
Thanks, Niels. Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca McPherson. I'm a postdoc at AVI, and I'm a physical oceanographer who looks at sort of the movement and the warming of the Arctic Ocean and how it affects the Greenland glaciers. And what's cool about this kind of thing is that we get lots of perspectives from different areas. And so we're really looking forward to what Hanna is talking about tonight, particularly because plastics, as we all know, are such an important environmental issue. Now, of course, you're all listening. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them on in the YouTube chat and we will pose them to Hanna at the end of her presentation. And with no further ado, please, Hanna, the stage is yours.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks for having me tonight. Happy to be here. So my name is Hanna, and I'm going to be talking today about some of my PhD research that's focused on the problem of ocean plastic pollution, which we may all know about, but from maybe a new perspective to some of you, which is entrepreneurship, innovation, solutions, that sort of thing. So I hope we have fun during this talk. And again, feel free to write any questions in the chat. So the talk today is going to be about exploring the impact of marine plastic entrepreneurs and what that might mean. I will explain, don't worry. So plastic, why do we care? I think some of us may know that plastic is a big issue. We've seen images of plastics washing up on beaches. We've seen videos of turtles with straws in their noses. But we also know that plastic is in our everyday lives. We use it almost constantly. And it's hard to imagine a future with absolutely no plastic. So I want to, at the beginning of this talk, think a little together about what plastic means. And I may actually involve my lovely hosts as well. So first, plastic, the good. Plastic can be a really, really useful material. But when is that? What are the cases where plastic really makes sense? And what are cases where maybe plastic is being used in excess? The bad. So plastic that's creating unnecessary waste. You can imagine single-use plastics that immediately get used and thrown away, but also the ugly. So there are many plastics that can actually cause harm to animals, ecosystems, and also to humans. So I'd like everyone to look around today, whether you're watching this from your phone, in your living room, somewhere in your house, or you're on the go, perhaps open your backpack. Can you see an example of a plastic that is good and you think it's useful? And a plastic that is bad and unnecessary. So maybe just look around, maybe look down at the clothes you're wearing. Do you think they're made of polyester or nylon? What is the furniture in your house made of? What is your backpack made of? What do you think is good and useful? And what could you consider this bad plastic? Personally, I just grabbed from my kitchen a plastic water bottle. It was used very little and it is now going to be thrown away. It's also green, which is hard to recycle. This, I think, is a pretty obvious bad plastic, whereas this is a reusable plastic water bottle. They serve the same function. This is also made of plastic. It's been around the world with me. It's been really banged up, but it's still useful. And I think that's an important distinction to make. Plastic is not all evil and it's not all good, but it is important for everyone to look around and think, okay, where is plastic really serving a purpose and where can we maybe look for alternatives? So considering some other good plastic uses, plastic can be used in lots of electronics. It's used in healthcare. It's also used in vehicles, airplanes, things like that. And plastic being used in a car, for example, makes the car lighter, which means it emits less carbon when it's being driven. So there are many instances where switching to an alternative may actually be a worse choice. But of course, plastic can also be bad and unnecessary. Think of all the plastic that we use in our modern society: takeaway containers, plastic straws, candy wrappers that are used and then thrown away almost immediately. These are plastics that are low value, they're used very little, and they often end up in the environment. And then there's the ugly. And we call the ugly things such as plastics with harmful chemicals and toxins, plastics that end up in the environment. And also, if you think about a cigarette filter, so maybe you didn't know this, but the filter in a cigarette is actually made of plastic. And after someone has finished smoking it, that plastic filter has absorbed lots of that gross chemicals, tar product in the cigarette. If that cigarette ends up in the environment, gets eaten by an animal, or ends up in a river or an ocean, it can be really toxic and harmful. So that was a little quick exercise to maybe have you consider, maybe not all plastic is good, not all plastic is bad, but there's obviously some plastic that we should try to reduce. So the problem of ocean plastic pollution has risen to be one of the top environmental challenges of the 21st century. And although scientists have been studying this problem for years, it has recently become much more mainstream. There are news articles covering the staggering amount of plastics entering the ocean, and also talking about how there are these large swirling gyres of plastics in the middle of the ocean. And even this week, actually, as we speak, there is a UN discussions on what are we going to do as a government, as a global government, about plastic. So this rise in media and news attention, as well as ongoing scientific research, has really led to societal mobilization. For example, we can think of the Zero Waste Movement, which is a grassroots-led campaign to generate less waste and choose plastic-free products. But there are also hundreds, if not thousands, of nonprofit and community organizations leading beach cleanups, conducting community engagement projects, working on education, doing these activities all over the world. And policies have followed suit, such as plastic and straw bans, plastic bag and straw bans, and requirements on how much recycled content should be in certain products. And again, this is all culminating in this UN treaty, which I'll talk a little bit later. And so, of course, businesses have taken note, and many are measuring their plastic footprint, trying to increase recycled content, and investing in new materials. You might notice this when you go to the grocery store, that there are new labels on products advertising recycled plastic, recyclable, different materials. We all know the different straw types that are now being offered in places where plastic straws are banned. And those are coming from regulation. And this movement has gained momentum, and it has led to changes throughout society with the goal of stopping ocean plastic pollution. And this was the context in which I conducted my PhD research, trying to understand how new companies, business models, and entrepreneurs were working in this system, in this change, to try to move to a world with little to no plastic pollution. Startups and entrepreneurs have really risen to this challenge. So this figure is from one of my papers where I looked at startups specifically focused on the problem of ocean plastic pollution. And this figure is already 3 years old. It stops in 2020, but I think we can all see this just staggering rise of companies and startups specifically looking at ocean plastic, trying to solve ocean plastic pollution, but also trying to start their own company. So I identified over 100 companies around the world, mostly in Europe and North America. But as you can see, there's just been an explosion of businesses working in this space. So I grouped these companies into 4 categories based on the way they were managing marine plastic. And you can think of these as strategies more broadly that are used to tackle this problem. The first that I identified, 31 companies, were focused on prevention from key leakage points. So this can be from rivers, for example, setting up barriers or booms to trap plastic before it can enter the ocean, but also wastewater. So wastewater contains a lot of runoff either from industry or individuals that may contain lots of tiny pieces of plastic, microplastic. And so there's companies focused on that part of the problem. 30 companies I found were focused on collecting plastic from marine and nearshore environments. So these are boats, aqua drones, different systems that could be used to go into marine environments and remove plastic that already ended up there. The third category was focused on transformation. So once you've collected this plastic, it's often very mixed, dirty, degraded. It's not exactly the most ideal candidate for recycling. And so these companies are trying to develop novel technologies and options for transforming that recovered plastic into a useful product. For example, construction materials or things like that. And finally, companies focused on monitoring and knowledge development. These could be phone apps or consulting services, really contributing to the knowledge and awareness of where plastic is, where it's coming from, and how it can be managed. And studying these companies was incredibly interesting. I loved doing it. I loved talking to the entrepreneurs. Everyone was super motivated. They really felt like they were at the front of this fight against plastic. But I quickly began to realize that in order to solve the problem of ocean plastic pollution, it's really quite ineffective to scoop it out of the water. It's actually better to change the way that plastic is used and managed on land. And to do that, ideally, our current system would move from a linear economy, which we currently live in, where resources are harvested, made into products, which are then used and disposed of, to a circular economy. You may have heard of a circular economy. It's kind of a buzzword right now, but essentially the circular economy concept is that resources are cycled through the economy numerous times. So materials are reused, recovered, and recycled, and importantly, waste is minimized. So it's not just about recycling, but it's about reducing production, reducing waste, and really creating a system that is regenerative. So this is the ideal. But moving away from what we're currently living in, the current system, to a more sustainable system or a circular economy system is not so easy. Even if you want to move to a system with little to no plastic pollution, so consider plastic in the environment, even this ideal society would require radical changes to consumption and production. Consider a trip to the grocery store in our current society, just how many products are wrapped in plastic, but not only that, lots of vegetables and fruit are grown in fields covered in plastic protective layers, shipped in plastic boxes, prepared using plastic utensils, and ultimately thrown away into plastic trash bags. So reducing plastic is not easy, and it is definitely not cheap. And if we really want to end up in a better system, industry needs to change the way that products are manufactured to reduce the amount of plastic and design products that can be easily recycled. But also waste management infrastructure will need to be improved. So we'll need better technologies and more efficient technologies for recycling and recovery. Science and academia can generate knowledge about material innovation and research new solutions. But also the culture of consumerism and single-use products must shift, and we as consumers will need to adopt new behaviors if we want to achieve this. And also new market structures, such as for refillable products instead of single-use products, and sharing economy will need to be implemented. And finally, policy will have to support these changes. We'll have to support with changes to legislation, regulation, and appropriate subsidies. Plastic is embedded in our modern throwaway society, and therefore so is waste. And a journey towards a more sustainable system is complicated, it's complex, and there are many trade-offs and complicated interactions that you can't predict. That being said, change is happening. And in my PhD, I studied entrepreneurs specifically and businesses working on this change and trying to move our system just a little bit closer to a society with little to no plastic pollution. So how did they do this? Well, you saw some examples when I talked about marine plastic companies, but there are other companies as well. And strategies that they deploy are often prioritized based on the waste hierarchy, which is shown here. So actions that are higher up on the waste hierarchy have the greater potential to prevent pollution, but they can be more expensive or require greater change to current societal practices. So I found examples across the board. So I'll talk a little bit more about what these strategies are. So for example, preventing plastic pollution. So one company designed external microplastic filters for washing machines. So maybe you didn't know this, but most clothes are actually made of plastic threads. Plastic is the feedstock for polyester and nylon. And when you wash your clothes in a washing machine, that plastic is shed from your clothes and it is deposited in the wastewater. And so there's a company that designed a filter that can capture these tiny pieces of plastic and give consumers the opportunity to know that that plastic is not ending up in waterways eventually. There's another company that has created a collection and recycling system for fishing nets, which previously would be abandoned or landfilled after they're broken or no longer in use. And so using a novel recycling method, they're able to turn this fishing net into skateboards and other consumer products, with also a really exciting and attractive story for consumers who get to purchase products made from fishing nets. Another is a monitoring app that allows citizens to tag litter that they see on their streets. They get incentives for tagging this litter on their phone. And the company has a partnership with the local government to better plan street cleanups and hold polluters accountable for the litter that is monitored through their citizen app to hold polluters, accountable. And so all of these companies, they're trying to work on this problem, but they're also trying to develop a profitable business model. And that's a challenge in and of itself. But what I realized in my PhD after talking to dozens and dozens of entrepreneurs working on this field is they're not just trying to do their one strategy, their one management strategy, and create a successful business. They're doing those two things, but they're actually also influencing the wider system around them. They're influencing other companies in the industry. They're influencing governments. They're influencing consumers. And they're having more of an impact, much greater impact than just their small company of maybe even 5 people. And I'll give an example of that. So consider, for example, the washing machine filter company that I described. So this company has introduced a new technology that was previously not readily available on the market. And by doing so, they've shown not only to consumers, but to other technology companies, like, look, there's a new technology that can be used. But they also recognize that not everyone knows what microplastics are, and even fewer people may realize that it can come from their washing machine. So they recognized that they needed to create awareness and urgency around the problem of microplastic from laundry in order to generate a solid customer base. Because if you have a solution to a problem that nobody's aware of, they're not going to want to buy your solution. They also worked on research and partnered with scientific institutions to further knowledge on the problem and monitor microplastics pollution, which further increases the awareness raising. They even met with appliance manufacturers to share their knowledge and encourage them to include filters in their appliances. And they lobbied governments to teach them about the problem while also offering a solution, stimulating discussions around legislation. And this has therefore created a new market for an environmental product that previously did not exist, and the impacts are snowballing. Now there are multiple washing machine filter companies on the market, so they are no longer alone in this. And in fact, in France, all new washing machines after 2025 will need to have a microplastic filter, and the EU is in similar discussion. So through their interactions with the system, the company had an impact far greater than the number of customers reached, the amount of plastic prevented, or even their own business profitability. So this is one case study of many that I researched. And during my PhD, I was really curious to learn how innovative business models and new ventures were creating value as a company, but also acting as an agent of change, working towards a more sustainable system. And this is extremely relevant right now, considering that as we speak, delegates from the United Nations are meeting in Nairobi, Kenya, to discuss the upcoming UN Plastics Treaty. This will be a global agreement used to create regulations around the use of plastic, incentivize improved management, and hopefully move society towards a more circular economy. National delegates are debating which options they will include in what will eventually become a legally binding treaty by the end of 2024. So it's very ambitious, and there's a lot of very heated debates going on right now about whether it makes more sense to limit production and cap the amount of production of plastic versus focusing on waste management and recycling sort of at the end of the use of a product. And you can imagine that different stakeholders, different industry representatives, and different countries have very different opinions about what's the best strategy to limit plastic pollution. And though government regulation and top-down action is critical, through my research, I have found that startups and innovators can make a difference. And some of the ways that they have made a difference include boosting infrastructures. So in many places in the world, municipal waste management does not exist. So there may not be a garbage truck that comes and picks up plastic or picks up household waste. And if a company can enter that location and start collecting waste and showing, hey, there is a value. Hey, if we invest in recycling technologies and we start collecting waste and we partner with global supply chains, maybe we can actually make a successful business from waste management and also demonstrate to the government this is possible. And ideally that turns into municipal waste management integration with to reach more communities and boost the impact there. In another sense, there's also the opportunity to show governments that do have municipal waste management that there are better or new options to include. For example, there's a company that developed a boat that could collect floating plastic from a harbor and nearshore environment. And they started collecting plastic and demonstrating that their boat was functional and collecting a lot of plastic that was polluting the oceans of this country. And then they went to the municipal government and they said, don't you want to include this in your waste management? Because clearly there's a problem here. They can show how much waste they were collecting and they could demonstrate that there was a solution. So I think that's something that these companies are doing that's really interesting, is pointing to a problem and then offering a solution. I think it can be really hard to point to a problem and not have a solution. So that's something that I think is, been really interesting to see. Another way they have an impact is empowering individuals. So by engaging with citizens or consumers, they're able to show people that there's an alternative way. So for example, even just a reusable water bottle company, they're showing that there's an alternative to this. And an individual is now empowered to have the choice of how they want to drink their water throughout the day. So it can be offering alternatives, but it can also be offering engagement through litter monitoring apps, for example, which are often used during cleanups. But even this washing machine filter, it empowers somebody to take control over pollution that otherwise they would have no agency to change. And many of these companies recognize that awareness raising and education should be part of their business model. And they've also been really critical in strengthening value chains. So there's a lot of people that are really excited about the idea of ocean plastic products. So for example, plastic that's collected from the marine environment, which can be recycled and turned into perhaps a pair of sunglasses. But there are many steps in this supply chain, from a company or an organization that's collecting that plastic, managing it, aggregating it, processing it, cleaning it, flaking it, and then shipping it to another place where it's then extruded into a product, shipped to another place where it's then sold. And this supply chain can be extremely long. And so by working in this industry and strengthening these value chains, it's also demonstrating that there's a business case, and it can encourage future actors to participate in that value chain, which hopefully will then lead to a stronger recycling system, especially for ocean plastic and hard to recycle plastic. Another way that these companies are having a positive influence is they've been pioneering standards and certification. So this is a bit of a double-edged sword, because companies may lead by saying this product is made with ocean plastic, and then another company might say this is made with river plastic, or this is made with ocean-bound plastic. And it can be confusing to a consumer to understand, what do these things all mean and who should I trust? But at the same time, a lot of these companies have actually been leading the charge and being more creative, being more innovative, and showing that consumers are interested and attracted to these types of products. And now we're at the stage where hopefully there's going to be a little bit more regulation, for example, from the Plastics Treaty. And finally, a lot of these companies have been really engaged in material innovation. So developing new biodegradable or environmentally benign materials that have the potential to offer solutions to plastic. For example, if you get a disposable coffee cup, it's often paper, but there's a plastic lining inside. That plastic lining is needed because it can serve as a barrier to the liquid so that the plastic cup doesn't disintegrate. And there are now companies that are developing alternatives based on seaweed or algae. And if it can replace that plastic lining, then it has the opportunity to really change the way that single-use products are used. So I think I have fully inundated everyone with many examples from my research. And I do want to say that businesses obviously cannot create this shift on their own. To truly get to a place where there is little to no plastic pollution, all of society, from industry to academia to policy and consumers, will need to be on board. And I hope that you've left this feeling a little bit inspired to do something yourself. So with that, I will stop screen sharing.
Perfect. Thank you, Hanna. Very interesting talk. Before we check what questions are out there, I'm sure we also have questions. Let's see what next week's, the episode in 2 weeks will bring us. So we will have with us in 2 weeks from now a very special person, which is actually not a scientist, but a photographer. She's doing polar photography. In 2 weeks will be in German. She herself is American, if I'm not mistaken. So Esther Howard will take us into the world of her excursions with our scientists around the world to basically the most extreme environments there are, and tell us a bit about the power of images and how they basically translate our work that we do out there into something that is, universally understandable. And I'm sure that so close to Christmas, you will have a great time with that presentation, with some of the most stunning footage that you can probably imagine. All right, with that said, what do we have on the chat, Rebecca?
Yeah, Hanna, thank you so much for that really comprehensive talk. I mean, you brought up so much. I myself am brimming with questions, and we've also had a lot of from the chat. But a little selfishly, I'm going to start with one of my own because it's sort of ocean focused. I mean, you mentioned that there's some of these bigger like ocean cleanup projects, and I have seen some very fancy YouTube videos and all of the advertising from them. They make it seem pretty remarkable. But I'm wondering, and this is maybe not within your wheelhouse, but like how do you quantify, because I'm a scientist, how do you quantify how effective these are? Is it tons of plastic that is brought out of the ocean relative to how much goes in? Like, is there like an index per se of how you quantify the effectiveness of these kind of cleanup projects?
That's a really great question. I think it's something that a lot of these organizations and companies are toying with and struggling with because, for example, a large scale boat that's trying to collect a large amount of plastic is going to be very different than a microplastic filter. Like if you just want to go by weight, it's never going to be comparable. So that's why I think I'm a social scientist. I don't know if you could tell, but that's also why in my research I was kind of excited to look at these more wishy-washy ways that these companies had influence, because it was never going to be this, kilograms maybe of microplastics collected, but it was more looking at how the system was changing and how awareness was changing and policy was changing. And I think the ocean cleanup is a great example of that, because they have done a really fantastic job at bringing this attention to the attention of people and keeping it on people's attention. So I think it's kind of hard in some environmental, and maybe this is also more like nonprofit, where they really measure their impact in people reached and their audience and things like that. And for a lot of these companies, it's not going to be the scale of plastic collected that is going to be their main source of impact. And to follow up on that, I've also actually co-authored a paper with a bunch of really brilliant people, including ecologists, who actually caution a lot about the use of cleanup technologies, because there are issues such as bycatch, and there are issues such as what happens if you're, what else are you removing with the plastic? And if you are recycling And also in that paper, we also talked about cost effectiveness, and is it actually cost effective? So I think these are all very relevant questions that shouldn't be ignored. And my ultimate sort of like take home message there is the farther up you go, the easy, the better it is. So if you're stopping plastic at production, it's going to be the most cost effective than if you're trying to manage it once it's already sort of entered the environment.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Yeah, I can imagine how difficult it is, like you say, quantifying when you're talking microplastics. I go on the Polarstern sometimes, and we have scientists there who are capturing the microplastic in the air, and it's unbelievable. You're 85 degrees north, you're miles and miles away from anywhere, but they come down with these filters, and you think, wow, that is. It's scary, right? And that's where it has reached. So you're right. If you can cut it off at the source, quasi, then that's maybe a sensible way to go. Great, thank you.
Let's maybe also take some questions from the chat. We have one here saying, when I buy clothes that are made from recycled plastic bottles and the like, how do I return them to the system? As of now, I would drop them in the bin and it would be burned, wouldn't it?
Yes, I think that that's also an issue with recycling of plastic, is it cannot be recycled indefinitely. So most plastic clothing, nylon, is made either from like fishing nets, which are one plastic, usually one polymer of plastic, or PET bottles. And that material, as far as I know, cannot be recycled again. So there are textile recycling projects that are happening where it's like using the same fabric, for example, and not breaking it down. But currently, no. So that's also the challenge with saying that plastic can be recycled. It can't indefinitely. It starts losing a lot of its qualities. And it's also why, like when I was growing up, all like Sprite bottles were green, and now Sprite bottles are actually clear. It's because the second you dye a bottle green, it's a lot harder to recycle, because if you recycle a green bottle with all of these clear bottles, you're going to have this weird color. So they don't actually usually recycle any green plastic. So when these companies switched from green to clear, it was actually this big win for recycling. But maybe they didn't advertise it as much because they realized that they had been acting so poorly for so long.
Well, thanks for that answer. I was wondering myself. Being a fan of surfing, all these companies now, they only basically produce all their board shorts and whatsoever, from recycled plastic. And I was wondering just myself. So it's a second life, but it's then it ends, right? So this is what
And I think, like I said, being able to say there's a strong market for recycled plastic is also encouraging recovery and recycling. So it's not saying that recycling and recovery needs to stop. I think it's probably better than it is using virgin plastic, but it's recognizing that there's only so many rounds that can go. It's not infinite.
All right. What else do we have from the chat here? So Oahu83 is asking, is this washing machine filter a new thing, or is it a business to business thing, as he or she has never heard of it? And
so interestingly enough, it's not new, because if you have a home septic system, you need to have a filter like this, because you need to be able to stop any non-organic from going in your home septic system. But that was a very, very niche market for this type of filter. And then with this sort of global outrage and awareness about plastic pollution in the oceans, plastic pollution in the air, plastic pollution in the water, it sort of also led to this microplastic awareness. And then this filter, I think, took some of the ideas from some of the technologies that were used in the septic tank and have upgraded it to be working on microplastic. So there's options now for, you can buy like an external filter and you put it on where your, in between where your washing machine goes to the water system. But in Europe, I think you can find new washing machines, though that's not the sustainable choice, is buying a new washing machine just for this. That will have these filters integrated. And hopefully also then industrial washing has this, because you can imagine, for example, a hotel, how much washing they're doing and how much pollution is coming from there compared to an individual.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. I think it's, yeah, like you say, it's all the concept of scale. Now, Fernando has asked a cool question, which to me sounds a little bit sci-fi, but maybe Hanna, you're more clued in.
Okay.
He has asked that, well, he said that there's currently this work that is on microorganisms that are reducing and eliminating plastic. Do you know if the research in this field is growing fast? Are they making progress on it?
So there are research institutes focusing on this. As far as I have heard, there aren't any startups focusing on this. I think it's a little bit more at the R&D stage. But then there's equally scared scientists saying, what happens if we release this plastic eating amoeba into the ocean? What is it going to eat? What is it going to stop?
Yeah.
So there's kind of a bit of the precautionary principle as well there, but there is definitely research being happening, and especially if it's going to be in a contained environment, it's a good opportunity to feed microorganisms all of our unwanted plastic and see what use we can make of the I think they can produce energy from that. I don't know. There is some exciting research, but yeah, so far I don't think it's gotten to the point of it's going to save our pollution problems.
Not yet, but it does. It sounds a bit.
We hope. There's a lot of hope in this field, we have to just keep hoping.
Yeah, this is the same for us all, I suppose. Yeah, no, very, very cool. Thanks.
Now I'm really scared if the amoeba gets released, I'll be,
right?
Surfing with no shorts anymore.
It's gonna crawl up you. I think there's like a Spider-Man movie where there's like things that take over.
God.
Nice.
I will certainly have nightmares about these amoeba monsters tonight. But I actually have a question which is not as sci-fi. So what are like the most common pathways how the plastic actually ends up? Because as you say, it would be best to stop it at the source or the production. But for the good plastic that we do need, like what are the most typical pathways how your plastic bottle ends up in the ocean?
Yes, so this enters a whole other like topic of complicatedness, but a lot of waste from developed countries is shipped to less developed countries. So there's a huge problem with the global waste trade, and a lot of plastic pollution is coming from less developed countries, especially in Southeast Asia, Latin America. But it's a lot of that waste was not created necessarily there. So there are lots of papers that study like where this export is coming from. So a lot of it is coming from rivers, for example, in Southeast Asia. But a lot of waste gets shipped to Southeast Asia. So that's a big problem. As well as in waste management systems that are not managed effectively enough. I think also with climate change, we're seeing more extreme weather events and floods and massive rain events will also contribute to overloading of systems, which will even lead to, pollution happening in Europe. So it's not necessarily that we're immune to it here. But this is something that I hope is really going to be covered in the plastics treaty, like strict regulations that we can't, lots of European countries say we want to aspire to reach certain recycled plastic goals. How much of that is actually coming from plastic they ship abroad and then say is recycled there? But we don't have to look too hard at it, like we'll ship this to Malaysia and it'll get fully recycled and then they can just fill in their quotas. So that's something that it's been a huge problem, and sort of uncovering that is still a massive undertaking, and I hope the plastics treaty works on it.
Thanks. So we have one more chat question. I think if there's any others, just fire away. I think we have a great specialist here with us tonight. So Lena is asking, what can we all do to change the system fast and on the big scale?
Big question. Personally, what I try to do is consume less. If I consider clothing, for example. A few years ago, I took a mission to not buy any new clothes for 6 months, and that has sort of carried on. I've made a few exceptions, but things like that, like most products that we buy are in some way made of plastic. So being very thoughtful about that, and buying less and buying smart and buying durable. So products that will last a long time. I mean, these sunglasses are plastic and I bought them new, but I'm going to take care of them and I hope they last a long time. And I think also encouraging your supermarket, encouraging your grocery store to say, hey, we'd like to have no plastic options. You can shop with your wallet. You can choose to go to farmers markets or grocery stores that have options for no plastic. But I personally think that at the end of the day, it's our government's responsibility to regulate these corporate, big corporates that make plastic. And plastic is made of oil. So it's also the oil lobby, it's chemical lobby, it's fast-moving consumer goods companies, they have no incentive to reduce the amount of plastic. So yeah.
All right.
Maybe that's not so motivating at the end, but that's why, like, when I buy a plastic water bottle, I don't feel insane guilt because I know that I'm not the biggest problem here.
No, but you try to buy less, and we've seen yours
Definitely
that you now use instead. Okay, I need to slip in a question for myself. So far, I haven't done that, and maybe it goes well together with a question that I see just came in from Fernando Afonso. He is asking, do you think seaweed can at some point in the future replace plastic? And I would like to add, I've worked in the past with biodegradable plastics for filter systems in aquaculture.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just wondering how good that is and what problems they cause. And I also know, buying some of these whether it could recyclable plastic things for the organic trash that actually do not really do all that good. I'm not really a specialist in that. So are there like other options that can replace plastics such as seaweed, or is there any biodegradable alternative that you think has a potential with actually not being toxic?
All the but yeah, I think this seaweed lining that's being developed, it's by a British company called Skipping Rocks Labs, I believe, and they actually it's the first material to be declared as fully biodegradable plastic-like material. And so it's one of these options where it's as far as I can tell, and I'm also not an expert, but from what I've read about it, it has the option to both serve as that barrier, that water barrier, but also genuinely biodegrade. So I think there's been a lot of people have been really excited about the idea of biodegradable plastic, but it's a little bit of the chicken and the egg that there's also not systems in place that can handle biodegradable plastic, because you can't put it in your garden compost. It needs to go in an industrial composter, and most places don't have industrial composters. So if you're throwing your biodegradable plastic in the organic, then it's actually causing a problem. And if you throw it in the plastic, it's also causing a problem because it's made from different polymers. So it's kind of one of these things that if the whole system was developed at once, then we could definitely see biodegradable plastic as being a great alternative, but it's not. And so it's causing a lot more problems than doing good. Yeah.
All right. Is there any other question, Rebecca, in the chat? I don't see any further. No, so we're all good there. Hanna, we don't want to take much more of your time. I think it's been a great, very comprehensive talk, just as Rebecca said. I enjoyed it talking to you. For all of you out there, thanks for joining us tonight, that you were live with us, and hopefully also all you that joined in later will watch this over the coming month. Enjoy it as well. If you have further questions, just leave them in the comment section below and we'll come back to Hanna. I mean, probably not the next day, but for sure we'll at some point have some answers for you there. If you're German speaking, or if you're just into graphic photography, I think the 30th of November should be booked in your schedule, because then Esther is with us. But with that said, I hope to see you soon. Have a great time. Thanks for coming, and have an enjoyable evening. Thank you all. Bye-bye. And yeah, I hope to see you soon when it has.
Wissenschaft fürs Wohnzimmer.